everyone. So I am Hasai, the moderator from Group 3. So today we are going to presentate about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. And before we enter the material, let me introduce to our team. So this team built it to discuss about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. So our team has several members. The first one is Patrick, Hansel, Waude, Rizka, Shifra, Meria, Sandra, Firda, Luis, Anggi, and Aziz. So our team has a mission. So our mission is to enrich ideas, thoughts, and knowledge about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. Before we enter about the material that we are going to discuss today, I will introduce you to what kind of material that we are going to learn. Like I give the points, the early points, so you can understand the material soon. So according to elanguages.org, there are 43% of world populations are bilingual, and only 3% of world populations are multilingual. So these people, they acquire number of language because they need them. They need for their daily conversations or everyday interactions. Also, the interest of learning linguistics, especially sociolinguistics. The general problems in this study is the linguistic variations that occur in multilingual countries. The sub-problems of this study are as follows: vernacular language, standard language, lingua franca, pidgins, and creoles. And for the next speaker, Shifra Huai will explain about what is linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. Shifra, time is yours.
Good morning, my friends. Thank you for this time. So now I'm going to explain about linguistic varieties and multilingual nation. So linguistic varieties is the diversity of language which used by many people in the world. Some people in the world cannot communicate or cannot build conversation with other people just using one language because maybe some people from other region cannot understand what we are saying about, so we have to use more than one language. And multilingual nation can be defined as variations of language or diversity of language which used by many people in a community or in a particular domain. So in a community or particular domain, there are so many people who use more than one language in their region. In their family, they use one language, but in their workplace, for example, they can use other language. So they use different language, more than one language. For example, there is a man from Bombay. His name is Peter, and he is spice merchant. So when he gets up and he talks with his wife and his children, he uses Kathiawari. And then when he goes to the local market, he uses Marathi to buy vegetable in the local market. And then when he is at the railway station, he uses Hindustani. And then when he reads newspaper on the train, he uses Gujarati. And when he gets to work, he uses Kechi, the language of spice trade all day, because he is a spice merchant. And sometimes he uses English to listen to the cricket commentary on the radio. So Peter is the person who are in the multilingual nation. He uses more than one language to communicate with other people or to do something he wants to do. And The next point is about vernacular language. So, vernacular language is the language that we can use just in a particular domain or particular region. It is generally refers to a language which has not been standardized and which does not have official status. So, vernacular language does not have official status. For example, Spanish is one of the vernacular language that some people use in US, but just in a particular environment. So there is small small region in US they use Spanish to communicate with the people just in their region. So they use Spanish to communicate with, for example, with their neighbor or with their family and or with their friends just in their environment. They cannot use Spanish to communicate with other people in other region in US because they are not know about the language itself. But Spanish itself is the national language of Spain and Chile, but it is not the vernacular language of Spain. So vernacular language is the varieties of language that people use in their home or when they use daily conversation with their friends or with their and in their environment. So maybe that's all from me. The next slide will be explained by my friends Angie. Thank
Okay,
you.
well, thank you, Saifra, for your explanation about vernacular language, which has been given to us. So now I want to present about three components of vernacular language. Well, so there are three components of the meaning of the term vernacular. The most basic refers to the fact that the vernacular is an uncodified or unstandardized variety. The second refers to the way it is acquired in the home as the first variety. The third is the fact that it is used for relatively circumscribed function. The first component has been most widely used as the defining criterion, but emphasis on one or other of the components had led to the use of the term vernacular with somewhat different meaning. Finally, the term vernacular is sometimes used to indicate that a language is used for everyday interaction without implying that it is appropriate only in formal domains. For example, like children are talking with their friends, use informal language from his places. Maybe that's all from me, and the next topic will be presented by Rizka.
Thank you, Angie. So, everyone, here I'm going to explain about standard language. So, as you can see in our slide, standard language is the language which has undergone some degree of regulation or codification in grammar and dictionary. Usually, standard language is used in the country which have their so many dialect or the country which use multilingual nations. Standard language can be defined as a language variety used by a group of people in their public discourse, and also can be used in many areas like high prestige, a prestigious variety, and economic, social, politic influence, and codified from grammar and dictionaries. Standard language developed in a similar way in many other European countries during the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. And there are examples. Pakistan persons are use Urdu as their country. Why they are used the language? Because Urdu language has decided as standard language there. And another example from our country is Indonesia. Indonesian language is a standard language because Indonesia is a unified language used to make people who have different language can understand each other. A language is firm that can be called the standard language. And there may be that question like, is standard language important? And we say yes. Standard language is important because it represents a distinction within a language that can indicate social class or upbringing. That's all from me, and the next presentation is about standard varieties and word English by my friend Luis Revualo. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am and friends, in here I'm going to explain to you the standard varieties and world English, continuing the explanation by Rizka in a previous slide. So, standard varieties. So, standard varieties is usually a written language that has undergone some level of a regulation or codification. For example, on grammar and dictionary. Recognized as a prestigious variation or code of a society and used as a high function along the difference with a low function. Only a minority of the world language has been written down, and even fewer have been coded and accepted by society as an appropriate formal function. Standard English emerged naturally in the 15th century from regional variation or regional diversities. So the dialects spoken in the area is what we know or think of as Standard English. This is influenced by the use of English and by the merchant class, which is very strong in the economic field. Standard variation. This variation is a variation that has been structured or codified. This codification generally reaches up to the recorded grammar and dictionary, and sometimes the standard form of the language that has been determined. The development of a standard English itself provides 3 criteria for recognizing the standard. The first is influential or is a prestigious variation. Second, has been codified and stabilized. Third, presenting high function because it is used to communicate in a palace for literature and administration. These criteria illustrate that the standard language is a particular dialect that has acquired a special position as a result of social, economic, and political influences. Next is about World English. Standard of World English has been provided as a very useful variation or communicating in a wide variety of dialect areas. Local variation of English with special linguistic features has developed in multilingual countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, and many countries in Africa, where English is presented as a valuable language for wider communication in multilingual contexts. The terms World Englishes and New Englishes have been used to emphasize the range of different variation in English that have been developed since the 19th century. For those who use English as a second language, Brad Cutthroat has classified it as an outer circle to distinguish those with native speaker or inner circle. Cutthroat also identifies expanding circles for those learning English as a foreign language. While there was a degree of a variation in the diversity of a pronouncement at all levels of linguistic analysis, the degree of variation in the standard of writing diversity was not so good before. However, globalization causes more and more English speakers in the outer and expanding circle than the current inner circle. So I think that's all for me, the explanation about standard varieties and world English. So in the next slide will be the explanation about Franca Lingua from my friends Ella.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Okay, guys, here I will explain about lingua franca and the example of lingua franca itself. So, the first is, what is lingua franca? Lingua franca comes from Latin, means that the language of nation of franca. In linguistic terms, lingua franca means the language of instruction or language of association in a place where there are speakers of different languages. So according to the Kaleden and Probonegoro 2005, they say that lingua franca is a language that functions as an intermediate language or language of association or language of instruction. In other words, lingua franca can be described as a language which is serving as a regular means of communication between different linguistics groups in a multilingual nation, and used habitually by people whose mother tongues are different in order to facilitate communication between them. So, the example of lingua franca itself is lingua franca can be called a national language and international language. For example, in Indonesia, there is various ethnic groups to connect these cultures. So we must use Indonesians in communicating, which means that Indonesians as an intermediate language. So not only that, the most obvious modern example is English, which is the current lingua franca in international diplomacy, such as business between countries, technology, science, and aviation. Means that English as an intermediate language which acts or is used as a liaison for both parties. So thank you guys, that's all from lingua franca. The next material is about pidgin, will be explained by my friends Maria Rahagam.
Thank you, Ella, for your explanation about French language. So now I want to explain what is pidgin language. So pidgin language has no native speaker. Pidgin languages are created from combined efforts of people who speak different languages. Pidgin developed from two groups are different. It seems like sign language, where only them who know this language, but no one's native language or nobody who created the language. Pidgin language do not have high status or prestige, and to those who don't speak them, they often speak some ridiculous language. For example, a gang who has a code language to explain something secret, for instance, police they call cops, and etc. So this slang is just used by the group who just know this language. So pidgin is mostly likely to arise when two groups of different languages communicate in situations where there is also a third dominant language on the coast. In a multilingual content, the pidgin language was developed as the language of trade between trade who carry a drug. So pidgin might come from word business pronounced in the English pidgin which developed in China, and etc. So what kind of linguistic structure does the pidgin language have? So the pidgin language was created from a combine of people who speak different languages. All languages involved can lead to sound, vocabulary, and grammatical features, but to a different degree. Languages that supply most of vocabulary are known as language, lexifier, or sometimes superstrate. So basically, pidgin language have three characteristics. First is it used in limited function and area. Second, it has a simple structure than the source language. The third is it generally have low dignity and attract negative attitude, especially from without. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So, why do pigeons develop? Pidgin is a language that has not native speakers. Pidgin as a means of communication between people who don't share a common language. So, Pidgin is not a native language. Pidgin is most likely to arise when two groups of different languages communicate in a situation in where there is also a third dominant language. And that cause in multilingual context, the Pidgin language was developed as the language of trade between traders who carry out trade. Many meanings have been suggested to describe the word Pidgin being used as a means of communication between traders. Pidgin developed with a narrow function. Pidgin is used for specific purposes such as commerce or perhaps administration. What kind of linguistic structure does a Pidgin language have? The Pidgin language was created from combination of people who speak different languages. Since pigeons serve very narrow and limited functions, it tends to have a simple structure and a small vocabulary when compared to developing languages. Pidgin languages tend to reduce the lowest grammatical signs. This makes Pidgin easier for the speaker to learn use, even if it's a burden on the listener. About attitude of pigeons. Pigeon does not have high status or prestige. For those who don't speak this language, they find it strange. Due to the large number of words in Pidgin that come from European languages, including Tok Pisin. Many Europeans consider Pidgin to denigrate their language. So, Pidgin languages have three characteristics. The first is use in limited function and areas. It means that Pidgin language is used by people in a certain group and situation. Because not many people know Pidgin, so its function is limited. And the second is it has a simple structure than the source language. Because Pidgin have simple structure and small vocabulary when compared to developing language. And the last is generally have low dignity and attract negative attitudes. Because Pidgin has not native speaker and doesn't have a sign status, Pidgin was created from the combined efforts of people who speak different languages and look like a sign languages where only they know the language. So that's all from me. The next slide will be presented by Filda Angelica Louis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Next, I want to explain about creoles. A creole is a pidgin which has accurate native speakers. Many of the language which are college pidgins are in fact now creole language. They are learned by children as the first language and used in a wide range of domains. Actually, this language is a development from Pidgin, but the difference is Pidgin doesn't has native speaker, but Creole has native speakers. For example, if someone has a small vocabulary and his can be added to by Creole. Then Creole is a pidgin which has undergone an expansion in terms of its structure and vocabulary to express the similar meaning or vocation occurred by a first language.
Creole will appear when Pidgin becomes the mother tongue. According Brown and Atordo explain that Pidgin is used in certain situations. If Pidgin is useful, it will become a lingua franca, and in the process will become a native language and eventually Creole's mother tongue. For example, when a man and woman get married and they have different language, then the Pidgin language emerges, which become the home language that was shared and become the mother tongue for their children. And maybe that's all for me. Next will be explained about structural features, vocation, and attitudes by
Now we're moving for the structure of features. The structure of feature, many people are not accepted for the Creole because it is less of suffixes on the pidgins for the mass of number or even for the number of nouns. And for the pidgins, it will be developed on the Creole if the people were using for the second generation to the expanded, and it will be accepted for many people. So we are moving for the functions. For the functions, it can use for the political administration, education, and so on. So it will be expanded by the by the society when they use the Creole as their daily communication. So for the attitudes, many people are not accepted, so it becomes a racial, so it becomes a political identity, and many people are not supported for the Creole because it is identify the immigrant from where they came from. Thank you.
The last is conclusion about linguistic varieties and multilingual nation. So, linguistic varieties is diversity of language, and they use it by many people, even known around in the world. It's like dialect. Whereas the term of multilingual nation can be defined as variation of language or diversity of language. Multilingual nation also which used by many people, but in a community or in certain regions. And over half the world's of population is bilingual, and many people are multilinguals. Because of that, they acquire a number of languages. The need for purpose of different interaction in their everyday life. And then the first language they are used is ethnic or tribal language. I think that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, that is our presentation for today about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. And I'm as the moderator, and Group 3 will discuss about this material in Google Classroom at Monday. So keep your eyes in Google Classroom and let's discuss about this topic and dig more about the information of this material that we are learned for this week. Thank you.